The sound comes before the light. Metal splitting. Something alive and furious slamming against a steel gate with the kind of force that belongs to earthquakes, not animals. And under that, low, chest deep, a sound between a scream and a prayer. A horse in a pain so complete it has turned into rage. Enid Vance is already awake. She has been awake for 3 years. Before we go any further, stop for a second. Because what you are about to watch is not just a story about a horse. It is about what happens when a woman who has already lost everything discovers that the truth she was told to bury never actually died. It was just waiting, bleeding, in the dark. If you have ever been told to stay quiet about something you know was wrong, this one is for you. Drop your city in the comments. Hit like if you believe that silence has a price. And stay with this until the end. Because the moment this woman finds what is hidden beneath that stallion's mane, everything changes. Everything. Moab, Utah does not forgive softness. The land out here is the color of dried blood. Sandstone cliffs carved by 10,000 years of wind. Red earth, so fine it gets into your lungs and stays there. Canyon walls that rise on all sides like the walls of a room no one was meant to leave. In summer, the heat is biblical. At night, when the temperature drops 40 degrees in 90 minutes, the desert makes sounds, contraction sounds, groaning sounds, as if the earth itself is in pain. Enid Vance chose this place on purpose. The Red Gate Sanctuary sat at the end of a 9-mile gravel road that most GPS systems simply refuse to acknowledge. 14 acres of hard-packed earth, 3 rescue paddocks, a reinforced medical barn, a solar array on the south-facing ridge, and a house that was barely a house. More a collection of decisions made during grief. A porch facing west. A kitchen that smelled like dried sage and coffee brewed too strong. A bedroom where one side of the bed had not been slept in for 38 months. She was 52 years old. She had stopped counting the days since the telegram, but the land counted for her. 3 seasons of snowmelt had carved new channels through the red clay near the east fence. The juniper she had planted the week of the funeral was now taller than her shoulder. Tom was doing what time did. Moving, not healing. That was a lie people told to survive, but moving, 1 inch at a time, like a glacier carrying stones. Before Redgate, Enid had spent 23 years as a specialist in animal trauma rehabilitation, first for the Bureau of Land Management, then privately for ranches across the Southwest. She understood fear at a neurological level, the architecture of a panicked limbic system, the specific stillness required to convince a damaged creature that the world still contained safe spaces. She had gentled horses, mountain lions taken from fighting rings, wolves who had been collared and chased until they forgot what quiet felt like. She had stopped taking contracts 2 years ago. The last one had ended when a client's horse flinched during a routine trim, and Enid had felt something crack open in her chest. Not the horse's fear, but the reflection of it. The mirror. She recognized, that afternoon, that she was no longer the calm. She was also the damaged creature, sitting in her own paddock, flinching from sounds that weren't there. She still had 6 rescues. 3 paint mares from a Nevada closing auction, elderly, mild-tempered. 2 quarter horse geldings surrendered by a ranch that had gone bankrupt in the drought. And 1 mule named Persimmon, 19 years old, who had decided years ago that he did not need to move faster than a slow walk for anyone or anything, and had enforced that policy without exception since his arrival. They were her responsibility. They were also, she understood privately, her reason. She did not have many of those left. The night she would later think of as the night everything changed began like the others, dry, starless, the sky stretched thin and electric above the canyon rim. There was a monsoon cell building 3 counties to the south, and the air carried the particular static that precedes dry lightning, a taste on the tongue like old copper, a buzzing in the fine hairs of the forearms. The weather radio on the kitchen counter had been cycling the same advisory for 4 hours. Electrical storm. 0 precipitation. High fire risk. Enid had checked the paddocks at 10. Everything settled. Persimmon was in his usual corner, facing into the rock wall the way he always did, as if the sandstone held some kind of answer he was working on. The mares were close together near the water trough. The geldings were down, resting, their breathing visible and calm. She had gone back inside, taken 2 ibuprofen. The back, always the price of 30 years of physical work. and sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee going cold and a book she had been trying to read for 6 weeks. The book was about grief. She had picked it up because someone had sent it to her. She had not made it past the 3rd chapter. Not because it was wrong, because it was too precise. The lights flickered at 11:40. Came back. Flickered again. She went to the window and watched the horizon to the south pulse white. 1, 2, 3 miles of canyon lit briefly in full noon detail, then gone, then lit again. She thought, I should check the barn connection. She thought, tomorrow. She poured the cold coffee down the drain and stood at the window a moment longer than she meant to, watching the light come and go. And then, from the direction of the main gate, not close, but not far, came the sound of metal splitting. She did not run. That was the first thing. Running communicated panic, and panic communicated danger, and danger was the last frequency she needed broadcasting across the yard at whatever was making that sound. Enid pulled on her boots at the back door, tied them with the practiced efficiency of someone who has done that in the dark 1,000 times, and took the kerosene lantern from its hook on the post. She lit it. The flame caught yellow and warm, throwing a circle of amber light that barely reached the nearest fence post. She walked. The air outside had the full electric charge now. Every step felt slightly wrong, like the ground was holding its breath. Lightning flashed 3 times in rapid succession from somewhere over the canyon rim, and in those brief staccato moments of white light, she saw it. The stallion stood in the center of the main yard, between the gate he had somehow demolished and the entrance to the medical barn. He was white, or had been, once. Now he was a painting of white and red, his coat so heavily streaked with blood that the color only showed where the neck met the shoulder, and at the barrel of his chest where the coat was thickest. He was enormous. Not ranch large, not even competition large. He was the kind of large that came from breeding programs that did not advertise, from bloodlines designed for something more specific than beauty. 16.5 hands at minimum, possibly 17. A neck arched in sustained terror, ears flat and rotating. He had destroyed the upper half of the gate by running through it. That was the only explanation for the geometry of the damage. Steel bars bent outward in a spray pattern, hinges ripped from the posts entirely. Whatever he had hit before the gate had been worse. 3 of his 4 legs showed lacerations, the kind made by wire under tension, not barbed wire from a fence, but the tight, purposeful pattern of high-security perimeter fencing. The deepest cut ran across his left shoulder and down toward the knee, a wound that was still actively bleeding, the dark fluid catching the lantern light in a way that made Enid's stomach fold once and settle. Below the mane, almost hidden by the tangled fall of white hair, she could see the older marks. Surgical, precise, scars that did not come from trauma but from intention. He screamed at her, not a neigh, not a whinny, but a full-throated scream of an animal that had passed through fear and come out the other side into something that no longer had a name, and charged 3 steps toward her before stopping, chest heaving. Enid sat down in the dirt. No, she did not crouch, did not slowly lower herself. She sat, like someone deciding to stay for a meal. Her back straight, the lantern placed to her right in the dust, hands open on her knees, palms up. The stallion screamed again. Spun. Struck the ground with his front right hoof, so hard she felt it through the clay. She did not move. She began to sing. The song was not a lullaby. It was not designed to be gentle. It was an old military cadence, one of the call-in response songs soldiers sang during long marches to stay awake and together, and Elias had sung it at the strangest moments. Over dishes, under his breath while reading, the time they drove overnight from Colorado, and he sang it for 6 straight hours with one hand on the wheel and the other holding hers. He had learned it at Fort Bragg. She had learned it from him. She had not sung it since the telegram. Her voice cracked on the first 3 words. She kept going. The stallion did not calm immediately. Calm was never immediate. It was a negotiation, a long, slow conversation between one nervous system and another, and the first language of that conversation was always, I am not moving away from you, and I am not moving toward you, and I am still here, and I will stay here as long as it takes. She knew this in her blood. She had taught it in lecture halls and in open fields and in the back seats of trailers at 2 in the morning. She knew it the way she knew the sound of Elias's breathing when he was deeply asleep. 12 minutes passed. The stallion stopped screaming. He still moved, still shifted, still showed her the whites of his eyes every time the lightning pulsed. But the charge did not come. The spinning slowed. His ears, which had been flat in sustained aggression, began to move, not relaxed, not yet, but inquiring. He smelled her from 8 feet away, stretched his neck out that full impossible distance and breathed her in, nostrils flaring wide. She kept singing. At 22 minutes, he put his nose in her hair. She sat perfectly still and let him. The blood from his shoulder was dripping now in a slow, patient rhythm onto the red clay beside her knee. She reached, slowly, 1 degree at a time. The motion spread across 20 seconds and put her hand against the side of his jaw. He trembled. She kept her hand there and kept singing and felt him, under her palm, begin the long trembling work of choosing to stay. She did not get up for another 15 minutes. When she finally rose, when he let her lead him by nothing but her voice and the lantern light into the medical barn, she was already calculating. Saline, betadine, compression bandaging, the thick needle for the deepest wound. Professional instinct. The language she spoke when everything else ran out. She did not yet know what was hidden beneath his mane. She did not yet understand what she had just agreed to protect. Dawn came fast in the canyon. One moment the sky was ink, and then it was gray, and then it was the particular burning pink that only exists at altitude and only lasts for minutes before the sun clears the rim and makes everything ordinary again. Enid had been in the barn all night. She had cleaned and sutured and bandaged in the methodical silence of someone who has done emergency work alone often enough that the silence no longer felt lonely. It felt focused. The stallion had allowed it all. That was what kept unsettling her. A horse in this much pain, this recently traumatized, should not have allowed sutures without sedation. She had offered the sedative. She always offered, always let them choose by the movement of their body, and he had not required it. He stood and breathed and occasionally turned his head to watch her work with those dark eyes that seemed to be doing something more complex than looking. She had cataloged the wounds systematically. The shoulder laceration, sutured, 8 stitches, clean edges despite depth. The foreleg cuts, 3 separate wounds on the left leg, 2 on the right, consistent with a single pass through tensioned wire at speed. The oldest scar tissue under the mane, for incision marks, each less than 2 centimeters, arranged with the precision of someone who knew exactly where they were cutting. Not veterinary work, or not only veterinary work. She had noted all of it and set it aside, the way she set aside everything that did not serve the immediate need. She had found the shoes at 4:15 in the morning, custom forged. That was the first thing, not the work of a standard farrier. The angle of the heel and the weight distribution said performance breeding, the kind of specialized shoeing done for horses worth more than most houses. And on the inner face of the left rear shoe, stamped in shallow relief. Not painted, not laser-etched, but pressed into the metal with a hand stamp the way a craftsman marks his work, 2 letters. Evie, Elias Vance. She had sat back on her heels and looked at those 2 letters for a long time. Her husband had been a military veterinarian. He had also been, in his private time, a farrier, trained by his grandfather on a small ranch in eastern Tennessee. He had carried his personal stamp everywhere, marked every piece of equipment he made or modified, from saddle hardware to field splints. It was a habit she had teased him about. He had called it accountability. He had said, "If I make something, I should be willing to put my name on it." The letters blurred. She pressed her thumb against the steel and felt the depth of the impression and thought about his hands making this. The specific pressure required. She thought about when. She thought about the horse standing quietly in the straw beside her, breathing in the slow, exhausted rhythm of an animal that has finally found a place safe enough to let the body start its accounting. She thought, he knew this horse. She thought, this horse was supposed to find me. The sun had fully cleared the canyon rim when she heard the first helicopter. Not the agricultural choppers that occasionally tracked BLM cattle. She knew that sound, 2-bladed, intermittent, passing. This was different. This was multiple rotors, synchronized, low and deliberate, and the acoustic shadow that came before them told her they were following the canyon contour, staying below the GPS visible altitude, the way search teams flew when they did not want to be seen from above. Then the second one. Then, and this was when her stomach made a sound she was not aware stomachs could make. A third. She walked to the barn door and looked out at the gravel road. Dawn light still shallow, shadows long and thin across the clay. Nothing yet. But the road dust was moving. Not from wind. Persimmon, in his corner paddock, had his head up. All four horses were awake and watching the same direction. Animals knew. Enid went back to the stallion. She put her hand flat against his jaw the way she had in the dark and felt the warmth of him, the still elevated pulse under the skin. She looked at him and he looked at her, and she thought, with the particular clarity of someone who recognizes the precise moment before everything changes, they are not coming for the horse. They are coming for what the horse carries. And they are going to want it badly enough to hurt her to get it. The first vehicle reached the gate at 6:42. Not one vehicle. 7. 4 double-cab tactical pickups, black, no plates, brush guards on the front that had clearly seen use. 2 armored SUVs with blackout windows. 1 command vehicle, a hardened utility truck with roof-mounted communications array, satellite dish, already turning. They came down the gravel road in a single-file tactical column, spacing precise, and they stopped just short of the demolished gate with a coordination that did not belong to law enforcement. Law enforcement improvised. This was rehearsed. The helicopters, she could see 2 of them now, hovering at the canyon rim, holding station with the mechanical patience of machines that do not get tired, made no move to land. Enid stood on her porch. She had changed into clean clothes. She did not know why that mattered to her, but it did. She had washed her hands twice. She held her coffee cup, still warm, and watched the vehicles stop and the doors open and the men deploy in a perimeter pattern across her property with the kind of efficiency that made the whole thing feel abstract, like watching a demonstration. 20 men, minimum. Body armor. Rifles carried low but present. Tactical glasses that made every face anonymous. They moved to the fence lines, to the paddock corners, to the lane beside the medical barn. 1 team of 3 went directly to the satellite antenna array on the south ridge. She watched them disconnect her antenna. She took a sip of coffee. A door opened on the command vehicle, and 1 man walked toward the porch. He was not dressed like the others. No tactical gear. Dark civilian clothes. Pressed. A jacket despite the morning heat. He was in his late 40s, with the build of someone who had been athletic most of his life and had not entirely stopped. Not bulk, but the particular economy of someone whose body was still a tool. His face was controlled in a way that suggested considerable practice. He moved across her dirt yard like he owned it, not aggressively, just matter-of-factly. The way you walk through your own kitchen. He stopped at the bottom porch step. Mrs. Vance. She looked at him. Director Vance, he said, and when she did not react, he added, with a small precision, no relation. She let that sit between them. You know why we're here, he said. I know you drove 9 miles of private road without an invitation, she said. And I know your people just cut my emergency uplink, which creates a liability question I'd think carefully about if I were you. Something moved in his face. Not surprise, exactly, more like recalibration. He said, the animal in your medical barn is a classified research subject, registered to a federal biodefense laboratory under the Domestic Research Authority Act. Its escape last night triggered a containment protocol. He paused. You are not in trouble. You responded appropriately to what appeared to be a distressed animal, which is consistent with your professional history. We're not here to charge you with anything. He said it the way someone reads the introductory paragraph of a document they wrote themselves. There is a concern, he continued, that the animal may be carrying an experimental biological marker. Not a disease, not communicable. But the marker is proprietary, and its presence in an uncontrolled environment creates regulatory issues. She looked at him over the rim of her coffee cup. We need to take the horse back, he said. She said nothing. He waited a beat, and when she still said nothing, he walked up the first step. Just the first. A small escalation, measured. Mrs. Vance, I am going to be straightforward with you, because I think you're a straightforward person, and I have a great deal of respect for that. He reached into his jacket and produced a folded document. He held it out. This is a federal recovery order. It authorizes us to take possession of the animal and any materials associated with its containment. It also includes, and I want you to hear this clearly, a concurrent offer. A full record review and posthumous citation for your husband's service. The negligence finding reversed. Formally. On the record. Published. The coffee cup was suddenly heavy in her hand. He watched her. He was good at watching. She could see that. He was reading her the way she read horses, looking for the microsecond of give, the infinitesimal shift of weight that told him where the wound was. In addition, he said, a federal pension equivalent to your husband's full active duty benefits, retroactive to date of death. She looked past him at her yard. 3 of her rescued horses had been pushed by the perimeter team into the far corner of the east paddock. Persimmon had simply refused to move and was standing in the middle of a path with 2 armed men on either side of him, apparently unwilling to make the next escalation. That, despite everything, almost made her smile. "And if I don't sign," she said. It was not a question, but he answered it. "Then the biological marker creates a mandatory quarantine of this property. The animal will need to be euthanized on-site and incinerated. The land is held in federal abatement for up to 3 years during testing. And a concurrent investigation into whether you facilitated the escape by harboring a classified subject will be initiated." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "That investigation carries felony exposure, Mrs. Vance, including potential bioterrorism statutes, given the regulatory category of this research." The word bioterrorism landed in the morning air like something physical. She looked at the document in his hand. She looked at her barn. She thought about Elias, about the telegram, about the specific wording, negligence, self-inflicted, improper protocol, and the way those words had felt like a second death, slower than the first, because the first took the man and the second took the version of him she was allowed to carry in public. She thought about the letters on the horse's shoe. She said, "I'll need a few minutes." Director Vance smiled. It was a professional smile, not unkind, which somehow made it worse. "Of course," he said. She went back into the barn. The stallion was standing. He had eaten half the hay she had put in front of him, which was a good sign, metabolically, and also a sign that whatever exhaustion he was working through, the body's instinct toward continuation was still running underneath it. He watched her come in with those enormous dark eyes, and she noted, for the first time in full daylight, the color. Not simply brown. Layered. Deep amber at the center, bleeding to near black at the rim. She walked to him and stood at his head and looked at the mane. The scars she had cataloged in the dark were clearer in the morning light. She parted the thick fall of hair with her fingers, slowly, and looked at them. For incisions. Old. Years old, some of them. The most recent was still slightly raised, the surrounding tissue smoother than the older marks. She ran her thumb over it. Under the surface of the skin, there was a slight firmness. A density that did not belong to muscle or bone or the natural architecture of the neck. Small. Rectangular. Less than 2 centimeters in any direction, but present. A subdermal implant. She stood completely still with her thumb against it. Microchip implants in horses were standard, registration, location, medical history. But those were placed at the nuchal ligament, mid-neck, by a specific veterinary protocol, and they had a specific feel, small, hard, the size of a grain of rice. This was not that. This was something the size of a matchbook, custom placed, shielded by the density of the mane to avoid casual visual detection. She thought about what Director Vance had said. A biological marker. Proprietary, not a disease. She thought about what he had not said. She thought about Elias. Her husband had been deployed, in his last assignment, as the senior veterinary officer for a federal research station. The assignment had been listed, in his service record, as routine, livestock health assessment for a remote government agricultural facility. She had not questioned it at the time. He had gone on assignments before. He came back from all of them changed in small ways, carrying things he did not put into words, but he always came back. Until the last time. She remembered the last phone call. She had replayed it enough times that she no longer heard his voice in it anymore. Just the shape of the conversation, the specific way he had paused before saying goodbye. The pause had a weight she had not recognized in the moment. She recognized it now. He had known he was not coming back. He had paused because he was deciding what to say with the time that was left, and what he had chosen to say was, "I love you, and I need you to trust that what I did mattered." She had told him she trusted him. She had told him to come home. He had not come home, and the telegram had said he died of self-inflicted medical negligence during a routine inoculation procedure. And she had spent 3 years trying to understand how a man with 23 years of impeccable service and the specific careful attention to protocol that she had watched him practice every single day of their life together could have killed himself through carelessness. She had never believed it. She had no proof. She looked at the implant under her thumb. She thought, this is what he left. She thought, this is the proof he hid somewhere they could not confiscate it. She thought, and he put it inside an animal, because he knew I was the only person in the world they might send that animal to who would know what to look for. The barn door was open behind her. She could see two of the tactical team members from where she stood, positioned near the fence. Watching, Director Vance was still on her porch. She had 3 minutes before his patience recalibrated into pressure. She had a choice that was not really a choice. She had never been able to leave an innocent thing behind. She walked out of the barn and across the yard. Vance was still at the bottom of the steps. He had not moved. That told her something. He was confident enough in the perimeter that he felt no need to position himself more aggressively. The document was still in his hand. She stopped 6 feet from him. She said, I want 2 things before I consider signing anything. He tilted his head. My horse is out of that corner, she said. All of them, back in their proper paddocks. And your people off my fence lines. A pause. Then he turned and made a short gesture. 2 fingers. And somewhere behind her, she heard boots moving, the low sound of a gate latch. And the other, he said, I want the document reviewed by my attorney before I sign. Your attorney is in Moab, he said. A 2-hour drive. Yes, she said. He looked at her the way people look at a calculation they are running internally. I can give you until noon, he said. She nodded once. I'll be in the barn. She went back inside. She had 4 hours. She did not intend to spend them waiting. The satellite antenna array was on the south ridge, and his men had disconnected it. But the array had 2 components. The primary uplink dish, which was now disabled, and the emergency transmission unit, a compact, solar-powered APERB-adjacent transmitter she had installed after a winter storm had knocked out all communications for 11 days, and she had found herself unable to call for a vet during a colic emergency. It was independent. It ran on its own small solar panel. It did not connect to the primary array at all. It was, at this moment, operational. She knew because she had checked it 3 days ago. She checked it every week. It was the kind of thing Elias would have approved of: redundancy, backup systems, accountability in the architecture of a place before the crisis arrives. The transmitter was housed in a weatherproof box mounted on the east wall of the medical barn, accessible from inside, painted the same dull green as the wall behind it. Invisible to someone who did not know to look. But transmitting data required something to transmit. She went to the Stallion and stood at his neck again and put her hand over the implant. She pressed lightly, experimentally, in 2 different directions. Nothing. She tried a 3rd direction, upward, toward the surface of the skin, and felt a shift. Not mechanical, not the click of a switch, but a warmth, slight and sudden, under her palm. She looked at the horse. He was watching her with perfect stillness. She pressed again. The warmth intensified. Then, without any sound she could hear, the Stallion exhaled. A long, slow breath, deeper than a rest breath, the kind of breath that was more like a decision, and the base of his mane lifted slightly, as if moved by a static charge. She looked down. At the collar of his neck, just at the edge of the oldest scar, a segment of skin had changed texture. Barely visible. A faint, darkened rectangular outline, perhaps 3 centimeters long, that had not been there before. An access indicator. She recognized the principle. Subdermal data storage. She had read about its development in livestock research contexts years ago, and again in a paper Elias had sent her, annotated in his handwriting, the annotation reading, "This is real. The applications are wider than their publishing." She looked at the transmitter on the east wall. She looked at the implant. She thought about the distance between them. She thought about the collar. It had come back to her in a brown envelope 18 months after his death, accompanied by a standard-issue personal effects letter. She had put it in the drawer of the bedside table. She had not looked at it since. It was not a standard military ID collar. Elias had custom-modified it himself, the way he modified everything, with additional shielding and a small embedded receiver for the field transponder units he used with research animals so they could share identification data across proximity distance. He had always said it was for the animals. She now understood it was also for this. She went to the house. The bedroom was exactly as it always was. The same configuration of absence she moved around every day without touching. She opened the bedside drawer. The collar was there. She held it in her hands for a moment. The specific weight of it, the cool of the modified casing, the small red dot of the inactive receiver. She carried it back to the barn. She held it near the stallion's neck, at the distance Elias would have calibrated for. The red dot went green. The stallion inhaled. And Enid Vance stood in the straw of her medical barn with the evidence of her husband's courage in her hand, and the murderers of her husband waiting on her porch, and she made the only choice she had ever been capable of making when it came to protecting what was innocent and true. She walked to the emergency transmitter. She lifted the green housing. She plugged in the uplink cable from the collar, and she initiated the upload. The progress bar was a small red line on a small screen, and it moved very slowly. 14%. 16. 19. She stood in front of it with her back to the door and thought about the last 3 years with a precision she usually avoided. She thought about the memorial service where the general had given a speech about sacrifice and duty, and she had sat in the front row knowing the speech was a lie and having nothing to use against it. She thought about the forms she had signed, the forms accepting the official finding, the forms declining the survivor's investigation, the forms waiving her right to contest the death classification, all the forms, all the small surrenders she had made because every legal contact she had reached told her the same thing. You cannot fight the federal record without federal evidence, and the federal evidence will never be declassified. 24%. She thought about what accepting Vance's offer would have meant. The rehabilitation of Elias's record, artificial, negotiated, a bureaucratic correction issued not because the truth had been told, but because a useful lie needed to be replaced with a manageable one. The pension, the reversal, all the things she had wanted for 3 years, served to her on a legal document designed to make her stop asking questions. She had wanted those things badly enough to feel their pull even now, even with the collar active in her hand, even with the progress bar at 31%. That was the part she had not expected. Not Vance's threats. She had half prepared for something like Vance. In the abstract, in the long middle-of-the-night way she had thought about what it would mean if she was right. What she had not prepared for was how much she still wanted the offered version. The clean version. Elias's name in a press release. Official, federal, acknowledged. The pension that would mean she could keep the sanctuary for the next 20 years without counting every bag of grain. She wanted it, and she could not have it on those terms. 38%. The door to the barn opened behind her. She did not turn around. She heard 2 sets of boots on the concrete. Not Vance. Too heavy, too military in the cadence. 2 of the tactical team. She heard them stop several feet back, which told her they had seen the transmitter and registered it as a problem without yet understanding what it was connected to. She heard one of them say, "Low," into a radio. Visual on an active transmission device. Requesting instruction. She kept facing forward. The progress bar moved. 46. 50. 53. Vance came through the door less than 90 seconds later. She heard him and turned. He was not wearing the professional expression anymore. He was wearing something simpler and more honest, which was the expression of a man who had been doing a precise calculation and had just been told one of the variables was wrong. He looked at the collar. He looked at the transmitter. He looked at her. He said, "Stop it." She said, "It's already uploading." He said, "To what?" She said, "The FBI's emergency digital evidence portal. The antenna has direct satellite access. It bypassed your disconnect." His jaw tightened. "That collar is government property. That data is classified under executive order. The data belongs to my husband," she said. "He encoded it. He hid it. He sent it to me through the only courier he trusted, an animal I would be able to help." She looked at him without flinching. "He knew what you were going to do to him. He built this before you had the chance." 61%. Vance took 1 step toward her. Just one. "Mrs. Vance." His voice had changed, not the polished control from the porch. Something underneath it, raw, the voice of a man who needed something very badly and was no longer entirely certain he was going to get it. "You don't know what's in that data. You don't know the full scope of what your husband was involved in. If that file reaches federal review outside of our management, it will not just affect this program. There are implications, security implications, personnel. I know what's in it," she said. She did not know exactly, but she knew enough. She knew her husband had been stationed at a facility that used horses as biodefense test subjects. She knew he had found the conditions of that testing to exceed any legal or ethical boundary he was willing to live with. She knew he had sabotaged the facility's documentation system and extracted the only clean copy of the original research data, the data that showed what the program actually was, what it had actually done, and encoded it somewhere they could not take it from him without taking him, which they had done, and then called it negligence. He was a good man, she said, and the simplicity of it stopped Vance mid-step. He was the best man I have ever known. And you people killed him and called him careless. And you sent me forms to sign about how careless he was and how sorry you were about it. She held his gaze and she did not cry because she had moved past the place where crying lived. And then you made one mistake. You kept the horse alive long enough for it to find me. 78%. Vance looked at the two men behind him. He looked at the transmitter. She saw him make the calculation. The window for stopping the upload was closing. If it completed, the data would be in federal evidence storage before anyone in his chain of command could intercept it, which meant the leverage of the offer was gone, which meant the only remaining option was what had always been behind the offer, the option that preceded it and made it necessary. She saw it coming before he gave the order. She had planned for it. She had planned for it the moment she looked at the letters on the horse's shoe. She moved first. The irrigation control panel was on the east wall, 4 feet from the transmitter, a gray box, industrial, connected to the pressurized water system she used to maintain the paddock mist lines and the pasture sprinklers. She had modified the system 2 years ago after a coyote problem. The paddock heads could be redirected to run interior barn lines at high pressure, and she had added a secondary reservoir filled with a water-soluble capsaicin extract, standard predator deterrent. She ordered it in 10-gallon drums from an agricultural supplier and mixed it at a 3% dilution ratio. 3% capsaicin extract at high pressure in a closed space was not lethal. It was, however, extraordinarily effective. She hit the diversion switch and the pressure switch simultaneously. The overhead sprinkler lines in the barn, 4 of them, running the length of the ceiling, dropped from dormant to full pressure in under 2 seconds, and what came out of them was not water. The effect was immediate and total. The 2 tactical men took the first spray directly, and both went down to one knee within 4 seconds, hands to their faces, the instinctive and useless gesture of people whose eyes have just been set on fire. Vance turned, which put his back to the nearest nozzle, which did not help. He was not down, but he was not functional, both hands at his eyes, staggering left. 89%. She grabbed the collar. She moved to the stallion. He had been reacting to the spray. Back, ears flat, startled, but the collar was active and close, and she put her hand flat against his neck, and he stopped. Just stopped. The way he had stopped in the yard in the dark when she had sat in the dust and sung. She took hold of his mane. She had not ridden bareback in 6 years. She got up anyway. The barn door was behind Vance, which was a problem. She did not go toward it. She went toward the emergency rear access, a 12-foot hinged gate on the north wall, used for loading large animals into transport trailers, currently latched from the inside with a simple bar mechanism. She leaned down off the stallion's left side, grabbed the bar, lifted it. 95%. The progress bar was in her mind, a number she was counting by instinct, and she knew she needed 10 more seconds. She rode him into the north yard at a collected canter. Not a run, not yet, because there were perimeter men in the north yard, and she needed one more thing from the control panel she had left running. She had set the paddock sprinklers on a 60-second delay. The men in the north yard took the paddock line activation, full pressure, full capsaicin, at 30 feet. She heard them go down behind her, the sound of men unexpectedly in pain. And then she was past the paddock gate and into the first open ground. 99%. She looked down at the collar. The screen on the small receiver read, "Upload complete. Acknowledged." She stopped the horse on the ridge above the canyon's first drop. She looked back at her ranch. She looked at the helicopters at the canyon rim. She thought, the FBI has it now. The whole thing. Whatever Elias recorded, names, dates, protocols, what they did to those animals, and what they did to him. It is in the hands of people who are not Vance's people, who do not work for whatever private entity Vance works for, who will be required by law and institutional obligation to look at it. The helicopters had not moved. They would not move now. Not with a federal data acknowledgement in the system. Not without creating a second record of obstruction. Director Vance knew that. She could see him, far below, standing outside the barn door in the morning light, not running, not pursuing, just standing. The way a man stands when he has understood that the thing he came to prevent has already happened. The stallion shifted beneath her, turned his head to look back the way she had come. She put her hand against his neck. She said, "Not yet. One more thing." They found her on the East Ridge. Two of the tactical team who had been posted above the canyon approach had circled wide and come up behind her on foot, and they were professional enough to come in without shouting, without the warning of noise, and she heard them only because the stallion heard them first and shifted under her weight. She turned. They had their weapons up, not aimed, slung to their chests in the ready position, which was a distinction that was disappearing fast. The taller one said, "Off the horse. Hands where I can see them." She did not move. She said, "The upload is complete. There are 14 minutes, minimum, before your director has confirmation from his legal team about what the FBI acknowledgement means procedurally. In those 14 minutes, every action you take against me becomes part of that federal record." A pause. "And," she said, "I should tell you that I called the Moab County Sheriff at 5:45 this morning from the landline in my kitchen, before your people arrived. I told him I had an injured horse of unclear origin on my property and requested a welfare check at 8 a.m. It is currently 7:49. The taller man's grip changed on his weapon, not loosening, but recalibrating. She looked at him directly. She said, "I don't know what they told you this operation was. I don't know what version of this you volunteered for. But there is a federal evidence acknowledgement in the system now with your faces on the entry cameras of this property, and the sheriff's department is 11 minutes out, and whatever your director says to you in the next 5 minutes, whatever order he gives you, you will need to decide if that order is one you want documented in a federal inquiry." She paused. "That's not a threat. It's arithmetic." Silence. The stallion breathed. Below them, at the ranch, she could see movement, not tactical, not aggressive. The command vehicle's door had opened. Vance's personal radio operator was outside, speaking rapidly into a handset. Two of the perimeter men had returned to the vehicles. The taller man looked at his partner. His partner lowered his weapon first. 30 seconds later, the taller man did the same. Neither of them said anything. They backed off the ridge 6 steps, and then turned and walked back down the slope, and she watched them go, and she felt the specific weight of a moment that had almost gone the other way. If she had been 2 minutes slower, if the emergency transmitter had failed, if the upload had stalled, she did not let herself go down that path. She looked instead at what was in front of her. The canyon, red in the early light, layered and enormous and old in a way that made everything happening at the bottom of it feel temporary. And from the direction of the main road, just at the edge of audible distance, the sound of a sheriff's department vehicle on gravel. 11 minutes. She had been right. She reached back and touched the collar at her wrist. The green dot was still illuminated. She thought, Elias would have timed this differently. He would have been faster, cleaner, would have built a margin into the plan instead of riding out of a burning building with 12 seconds left. She could almost hear him say it, that particular dry, affectionate correction he had for every plan she made that worked only because of luck and stubbornness. She smiled. It hurt. It also felt, for the first time in 38 months, like the right shape of hurt. She brought the stallion back down. She went not to the ranch house, but to the barn. The medical barn, still damp from the capsaicin spray, smelling of water and pepper and hay and the particular mix of chemicals that follows adrenaline. She brought the stallion inside and stood with him in the space where, for hours ago, she had found the collar signal and begun the only real fight of her life. She took the collar from her wrist. She held it in front of the stallion's nose, the way you present anything to a horse who has learned to tolerate the world. Open hand, no pressure, full choice. He lowered his nose to it and breathed. The receiver's green light pulsed once. Then the audio played. She had not known there was audio. She had not known the collar stored anything beyond the transponder signal. She had not known, because Elias had built this whole architecture quietly, over time, in the specific way he built things, for her to find, not to be shown. He did not like showing. He liked giving people the moment of discovery. The voice came out of the collar's tiny speaker in the close air of the barn, slightly compressed by the digital compression, but undeniable. His voice, his actual voice. He said, "Enid, if you're hearing this, you found the horse. Which means you're the last person I needed you to be. The bravest one, the stubborn one, The one who doesn't walk away from a wounded thing even when it costs her everything. She put her hand against the wall and stood still. He said, "What's on the chip is everything. Names, dates, the original data from the program, what they were doing to those animals, and why they buried it. I couldn't take it with me in any form they couldn't confiscate, but I could put it somewhere safe. I could send it to the one person in the world who would know how to protect it." She breathed. He said, "I need you to know I wasn't afraid. I was angry, and I was sorry to leave you, and I was angry again. But I wasn't afraid. I knew what I was doing mattered. I knew this would reach you." A pause. The static of a recording made in haste, in a place where haste was the only mode available. He said, "I love you. I always will, in whatever direction love goes when time stops. Take care of the horse. He's a good one. He trusted me." At the end, when he had very little reason to trust anyone, the recording ended. The barn was completely silent except for the stallion's breathing and her own. She stood against the wall for a long time. She did not try to hold herself together. There was nothing left to hold together. What had been held together by grief and silence, and the specific rigidity required to survive public injustice for 3 years, broke open in the silence of that barn, and she let it, because that was what breaking was for. Not destruction, release. The stallion, beside her, put his nose against the side of her head. The same gesture as the night before, in the dark, when she had sat in the dust and earned his trust 1 minute at a time. She put her hand against his jaw. She said, "Okay." She said, "I've got you." She meant it in both directions. The sheriff arrived at 7:58. 2 vehicles. For deputies. Sheriff Dale Okafor, who had known Enid for 6 years and had never had cause to bring more than 1 vehicle to Redgate for anything, got out of the lead car and stood in her demolished gate and looked at the tactical fleet still parked on her property and said nothing for a long moment. Vance came to meet him. What happened next took 45 minutes, and Enid was present for none of it. She was in the barn. She heard raised voices, not shouting, but the controlled intensity of 2 kinds of authority disagreeing, and the specific silence that follows when someone presents credentials and waits for the other person to decide what those credentials mean. She heard Vance's voice, once, clearly. "This is a federal jurisdiction matter." She heard Okafor's voice, once, clearly. "Not on my county road it isn't." She stayed in the barn. At 8:43, she heard the first vehicle leave. Then the second. Then, over the next 16 minutes, the rest of them, one by one. The sound of engines pulling back down the gravel road in the particular acoustic pattern of retreat. Not defeated, not conceding, but withdrawing under constraint. The specific movement of force that has encountered a boundary it calculates is not worth crossing today. The helicopters left last. She heard them go, felt the diminishing rotor wash in the air over the canyon. And then they were gone, and the desert was itself again. The big, empty, patient silence that had been here before any of them and would be here after. Okafor knocked on the barn door at 9 o'clock. He came in and looked at the stallion and looked at Enid and said, "You want to tell me what actually happened here?" She said, "I found an injured horse. I treated him. People came to take him." He looked at the wet ceiling. He looked at the capsaicin residue on the floor. He said. "There's a federal evidence acknowledgement in the system," she said. "I'd suggest you flag it with your department's federal liaison before you write your report." He looked at her for a long time. He said, "Enid, are you all right?" She thought about it. "Not entirely," she said. "But I will be." He nodded. He was a man who understood the difference between those two things. He wrote his report. The federal inquiry opened 9 days later. She knew because a woman from the FBI's field office in Salt Lake City drove out to Redgate on a Tuesday afternoon and sat across from Enid at the kitchen table and asked questions for 2 hours with the particular careful precision of someone who has read a document that surprised her. Enid answered everything. She answered it once, completely, without softening. The woman from the FBI had the specific kind of controlled face that comes from years of professional neutrality. But at the end of the 2 hours, when she closed her notebook, she said, "For what it's worth, the data your husband preserved is comprehensive. It's the kind of documentation that doesn't leave a lot of room for interpretation." Enid said, "He was thorough." The woman said, "Yes, he was." The rehabilitation of Elias Vance's military record was formally announced 6 weeks after the inquiry opened. Not as part of a deal, not as a negotiated outcome, as a finding, a correction of the official record following newly available evidence. The language bureaucratic and precise, and, in its precision, absolutely clear. The finding stated that Warrant Officer First Class Elias Vance had not died through personal negligence. He had died as a result of undisclosed circumstances under investigation by the Department of Justice. It was, she knew, the beginning of a longer process. It was enough. The news coverage was brief and factual. 2 minutes on the national evening broadcast, showing her ranch's fence in the background and a photograph of Elias in dress uniform. The photograph she had given them because it was the best one. The one from their second year of marriage, when he still had the Tennessee summer in him and had not yet learned to hold his face quiet. He was laughing in it. She watched that photograph on the news and thought, there you are. She thought, there you are. Director Vance was placed on administrative suspension pending investigation. The Vanguard Biometrics contract was terminated. The facility Elias had worked at, listed in federal records under a name that meant nothing to most people, was shuttered and placed under federal control. None of this undid what had been done. All of it mattered anyway. She kept the Stallion. She named him Coda, which was a musical term, the final passage of a composition, the part that follows the resolution and brings the whole piece to rest. It suited him. He had arrived in destruction and fury and blood, and he had become, in the weeks after, the quietest presence on the property, large and steady and precise in his movements, as if he had been waiting a long time to simply exist without threat. The Mares accepted him immediately. Even Persimmon, whose opinion of new arrivals was legendarily poor, stood beside him at the water trough by the 3rd week. On the morning of the first heavy snow of that year, the kind of snow that came fast from the north and covered the canyon rim in an hour and made the red earth white and strange. She stood on her porch with her coffee and watched Coda in the east paddock. He was standing at the fence that looked out toward the canyon, head up, looking at the open country beyond the wire. She set her coffee down. She walked to the paddock gate and lifted the latch. She said, "Go ahead." He looked at her, those layered amber eyes. Then he walked through the open gate and broke into a run, not the violent, terrified run of the night he had arrived, but something else entirely. Something that belonged only to an animal who has finally understood that no one is coming after it. Long striding, unhurried, powerful, moving out across the red and white country toward the canyon wall with the pure economy of a thing that has remembered, at last, what it was made for. She watched him until the snow took him. Then she went inside. The drawer of the bedside table was still open. The collar was on the kitchen table, where she had put it the morning after. She picked it up, and instead of returning it to the drawer, she set it on the windowsill in the light. It stayed there. Justice doesn't always arrive in a courthouse. Sometimes it arrives at 2 in the morning, bleeding in the dark, brought by an animal that crossed a desert to find the one person who wouldn't turn it away. Enid didn't wait for the world to correct itself. She chose to protect what was true even when the cost of that choice was everything she had left. And because she did, the thing her husband died to save finally reached the light. If this story moved you, if you felt the weight of it, the silence between the lines, leave your city in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. Stories like this one connect people across distances that would otherwise stay distances. Hit like if you believe that the truth, no matter how long it bleeds, cannot be permanently buried. Subscribe if you want to keep hearing the stories that matter. The next one is already waiting. Justice may be hunted, wounded, and left bleeding in the dark, but when it finds a soul brave enough to stand for it, it becomes impossible to stop.